Welcome back to the weekend. Anthony Opperman with you as we kick off the first installment of the weekend. And certainly one of the big storylines in sports last week was the World Series. And what a World Series it was for Major League Baseball. Every game had its storyline within it, and none bigger than Game 6 that certainly captivated a lot of people. And to kind of give us a perspective on what the World Series was like in St. Louis, welcoming now from KSDK TV in St. Louis, the executive producer of This Week in Cardinal Nation, Jordan Palmer. Jordan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us first and foremost.
It's my pleasure.
Now tell me, before we get started talking about the Cardinals, what was the bigger celebration in St. Louis? The Cardinals World Series parade this past Sunday, or the Rams actually getting their first win against the Saints?
Well, actually, it was one of those crazy days because it actually started off with the two coming together. The entire Cardinal team, minus maybe a couple players, actually did an appearance at the Rams game. I happened to be there for it, and they actually brought the World Series trophy with them. And it was just an incredible moment because no one saw it coming. People were watching, and as the Rams came out to do the coin toss, you could see there was an additional player who was actually taller than most of the Rams players, and it turned out to be Chris Carpenter in a 39 Steven Jackson jersey coming out to be sort of the honorary captain. And then when people saw him, you kind of got the feeling something was going on. And then out of nowhere, you saw Tony La Russa in a Rams jersey, and then all of a sudden, out of the corner, all the team came out carrying the World Series trophy, and they got a standing ovation sort of halfway through the first quarter, and then it rubbed off. And sort of the storyline became the mojo that the Cardinals brought to the Rams, and then what the Rams did was quite amazing. And then, of course, right after the Rams game, 70,000 people poured out of that dome and went straight to the parade. So it was an incredible day.
Well, before we get into some of that Cardinals mojo and what carried them to this World Series run, I think it's important to understand how much the game of baseball means to people in St. Louis because, I mean, it truly is a baseball town there, and I've heard from people there that they don't care so much about who you're a fan of, just as long as you're a fan of the game of baseball. Just talk about the importance the game of baseball has in a city like St. Louis.
Well, I grew up here, and I was initiated early on into what Cardinal Nation was, and you really don't know it when you get first submerged in it, and it really becomes almost the thing that when you leave town, it's what keeps you linked to the town. When I left for college, it was the first time I really started missing what was happening back in town, and the link was that I could read in the paper what the Cardinals were doing. And that was when you start realizing that the blood flow of Cardinal Nation really does reach up into you, and you become reminiscent of what you saw when you were a kid. I got to grow up and see Lou Brock and Ozzie Smith and Keith Hernandez and Bob Forsch and those guys, and you just become more proud of the things that you saw when you were growing up. And as an adult, as the winning continues and what's become known as the Cardinal Way, it's become an unexplainable, intangible, but what it is this desire to win, to play the game through the fundamentals, and it translates into the fan base as understanding the game. And that then translates into instances where Ken Griffey Jr. comes to St. Louis and hits, I believe, his 500th home run here. Instead of booing Ken Griffey Jr., an opposing player, he gets a 5-minute standing ovation in Cardinal Nation in a Reds uniform because we were honoring the man who played the game. It happens all the time here when players come to St. Louis. They get that extra oomph from the fans that say, we respect what you're doing for the game. Albert Pujols did it in Milwaukee. He basically made himself take a timeout so that the Milwaukee Brewer fans could honor Prince Fielder. So it really just is a way of understanding the game and what it means to the city itself, which is everything.
Talking with Jordan Palmer from KSDK TV in St. Louis and the executive producer of This Week in Cardinal Nation. And Jordan, with all those things that you just mentioned established, what did this improbable World Series title from a team that was 10.5 games out of a playoff spot in August and had to beat arguably the best 3 teams in all of baseball, what did this really mean to this city? Because I know that the previous one that they won a few years back was certainly special in '06. But I got to imagine this one maybe even a little bit sweeter because it was just so unexpected.
Well, I was just having a conversation yesterday with a member of the St. Louis Cardinals Hall of Fame. We were talking about this exact subject. And what we decided, and we're going to do an interview on this later today, is that '06 was an amazing moment because it had been the first time that we'd won one since '82. So it was kind of like the drought was over. And it was great that, we won it, and there was a great storyline behind it. But we were a first-place team that year that almost lost it on the last day. So we were kind of on the downhill. So that story of it coming back and beating, the Mets and the Padres and doing, or the Dodgers and doing what we did was tremendous to get to where we were. And then, of course, the series with the Tigers was a good series, and at the time that would have sustained us. But this series, the 11 series, the drama of the 10.5 games back, the drama of the August swoon becoming the September surge, and the immense collapse of the Atlanta Braves, allowing us to not even win the division, but to get the wild card, the back door, if you will, and then to do what we did to the Phillies in 5, to do what we did to the Brewers in 6, when every pundit out there said it could not be done. Everyone gave the other team the benefit of the doubt that they would win in the end. And then to get to the World Series, to see what Albert did in Game 3, to watch this at home or to be in the stadium and to imagine that you're watching possibly the greatest performance in a World Series ever. And then Game 6, I mean, what can you say? Like a kick in the head. This game, to get not only to the final out, which we've all seen 100 times, but to get past it, not once, but twice. David Freese, unbelievable, and we still can't get over it, and I don't think we ever will. And so, the end of this conversation with the Cardinals Hall of Fame guy, we decided that the '06 victory will always be remembered, but it will probably 10, 15 years from now be remembered sort of like the 1931 World Series. We know we won it, but no one knows the story because 1934 was the Gas House King. 1964 was the year of Ken Boyer and Bob Gibson and Lou Brock, and that was where 2011 is going to fall. It's going to fall right on top, if not the very top, of all the World Series, all 10 and now the 11th World Series championships for the Cardinals.
Certainly a number of storylines, and you pointed out so many surrounding the Cardinals' postseason run, but one of the more bizarre and interesting ones to come from this whole thing was the whole rally squirrel craze. And I know the Flying Squirrels got into the accident nutsy out to St. Louis. And talking with yourself and a few other folks, this thing really, and pardon the pun here, it went nuts. I mean, this was really a crazy phenomenon that took hold there in St. Louis.
Well, I'll tell you what, it goes back to 1982, and I'll kind of walk you through this real quickly and tell you why this is important. In 1982, I was in 8th grade, and the World Series comes along, and we all of a sudden put the World Series to music, and it became the song "Kool and the Gang Celebration." So that was the first year that we had sort of a rally call. In that case, it was a song. In 1985, it became "The Heat Is On." In 1987, we'd like to forget it because it was a terrible song, but it was the Wang Chung, one of the Wang Chung party songs. But the idea was that we always in St. Louis tried to create something. Something would evaporate out of nowhere that would become sort of the rallying call. And then in 2011, it just happened to be this little squirrel that showed up during a Skip Schumacher at bat and then appeared again. And it became, and I'm not sure where or who gets the credit for coining the term rally squirrel, but once St. Louis gets in touch with one of these little things, they will not let go. Then, of course, you have the haters who want to make fun of it. And that's fine. But the problem is with that is that they're not getting the real reason for it. And the real reason is just fun. The World Series is serious, and it is a lot of tension, and it makes your heart race. But in the end, it's supposed to be fun. And that's what St. Louis does with it. We don't take it very seriously. And in 2011, nobody took the Cardinals seriously. And so every game was sort of like an extra bonus. And no one was really going to get heartbroken if we lost because we weren't supposed to be there. And that translated into having fun with everything you could. And that became the rally squirrel. That became Torty Craig, which was an imaginary character that is Alan Craig's tortoise, who was tweeting, and he would tweet the funniest things. And so you had all these little elements that did nothing but make everything more fun.
Certainly incredible stuff coming out of St. Louis throughout the World Series. Talking with Jordan Palmer with KSDK TV in St. Louis, also the executive producer of This Week in Cardinal Nation. And Jordan, before I let you go, one more for you. On Monday, Tony La Russa announced that he'd be retiring as manager after 33 seasons as a big league skipper, and that including the last 17 in St. Louis. How surprising was that announcement to people there, and what do you think his legacy is going to be with the Cardinals?
Well, amazingly, everyone seemed to be surprised. And at the same time, as I was surprised, you think about it 3 more seconds, and you're like, why not? I mean, here's a guy who every year does this to us. You know, every year he signs a 1-year deal, and we go through the whole Tony La Russa watch. But last year was the year where we thought maybe this was going to be a 2-year deal, because we saw that when the Albert Pujols situation materialized in March, that they could not come to an agreement. You looked at Tony's deal, which was a 1-year deal, but each side had a mutual option to stay. And the idea was that this will be where we sign Albert, and Tony will play coach one more year with Albert. And a lot of people were then saying, well, Albert, must have known this was going to happen because he didn't sign because he knew Tony wasn't coming back. That had nothing to do with it, of course. But the surprise, yes, everyone here was surprised. It really was kind of a kick in the gut, because it was just 2 days, 1 day after the parade, 3 days after the championship, and boom, you get this big dose of what really was negative news off the top. But then you realize this is a guy going out on top. What a great story. The man retires. He's won 2 World Championships as a Cardinal manager. He took us to 3, 6 altogether World Series appearances. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame with a great class of managers, by the way, and another Hall of Famer for the Cardinals. I mean, it's really actually a very happy story, and whoever gets this job, I mean, it'll be a very sought-after job. A lot of big shoes to fill, but we're all pretty confident that they'll get the right guy.
Jordan, this show is all about talking about the fans and the personalities in sports, and I think certainly you're able to shed a lot of light on this personality of not only people of the Cardinals organization, but also the fan base there in St. Louis. It's truly a remarkable atmosphere, and I think anyone who has ever gone to St. Louis and experienced it firsthand can attest to that, and those that haven't, it's something that I think everyone should probably experience once in their lifetime. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Definitely appreciate it. Congratulations to yourself, not only working closely with the St. Louis Cardinals, but also being born and raised in Cardinal Nation. I'm sure you guys are still on cloud nine.
We are, and anytime.
Yeah, that's Jordan Palmer from KSDK TV in St. Louis, also the executive producer of This Week in Cardinal Nation. We've got more of the weekend with Anthony Opperman coming up next here on Sports Radio 910.
The Weekend with Anthony Opperman continues next on Sports Radio 910.